forsaken booth. The truth is you sadly mistaken proof. I'm better than layman shoot. I'm super.
Welcome to 3-Count Commentaries. So in this installment of WWE Developmental, we'll be looking at the most turbulent of all the developmental programs, the Deep South Wrestling program that was headed by Jody Hamilton from 2005 to 2007. So before we get into some of the controversies and other shenanigans around Deep South Wrestling, I have to tell you about Jody Hamilton. So Jody Hamilton debuted in 1956 in Missouri. He was 16 years old. In 1957, he made his official debut working in the New York territory with his brother Larry. In 1958, he became the youngest Madison Square Garden headliner when to team with his brother Larry against Antonino Rocca and Miguel Perez. In 1961, he moved down to Georgia Championship Wrestling, where he began working as an assassin. This is where he gained his partner Tom Renesto, and they were a tag team for about 15 years. He started the original Deep South Wrestling promotion in 1985. It was a fairly normal, run-of-the-mill wrestling territory, but it didn't last very long. Jody Hamilton was forced to retire in 1988 from a back injury. And at some point in 1989 or 1991, somewhere between that era, he contacted Bill Watts about funding a wrestling school. And that wrestling school became WCW's Power Plant. And this is where we're kind of going to take some time to talk about WCW's Power Plant, specifically how difficult it was training there. Batista, in his book, Batista Unleashed, talked about his experience in WCW's Power Plant and how notoriously hard it was to suffer through. So Batista's a bodybuilder and a bouncer. He sees a WCW tryout advertisement on television and decides to take the spot. So I'm going to read a little bit of his book. So let's get into it. It says, a lot of bodybuilders looked at it as something they wanted to do. Most of them, I have to say, thought it would be easy. For some reason, WCW decided to hold open tryouts around that time. They had advertised them on TV. It kind of sparked my interest. And now when I got back to Virginia, I decided to take a shot at it. He says, the tryouts were held at the Power Plant, which was WCW's training facility at the time in Atlanta. I went down with a buddy of mine, Lance Treadway. Lance was just about the same size as me. I was about 340. Lance was about 320. We completely dwarfed every other guy trying out in the class. I thought we had pro wrestler written all over us. But the lead trainer didn't. They called him Sarge. He wrestled in the mid-1990s as Buddy Lee Parker, and I believe his real name was Dwayne Bruce. I think he was maybe 5'6", maybe. He was a little midget. He really was. He looked like a jacked up little fire hydrant. A jacked up fire hydrant with stubby legs. We got there and he jumped right in our faces, started running us into the ground. He started us with free squats, which are your very basic squats with no weights. He was relentless. He put a bucket under our ass, and he made sure our butts touched the bucket every time we squatted. Now you have to understand, we're big guys. And after a while, those squats were literally killing us. We couldn't breathe, and our legs were water. The guys behind us, they were 170 pounds, 180 pounds, and they were doing half squats and laughing at us. Sarge worked us to the point where my buddy's nose just exploded. He started bleeding all over the place. Me, I began puking on the floor, but I just kept going. Sarge just kept running us into the fucking ground with all these squats and other calisthenics. I was doing them right in my own puke. Then he told us to lie on our backs, except that wasn't good enough. Scream, I'm a dying cockroach, he told me. Scream, I'm a dying cockroach. Doing that, yelling, anything, takes what little breath you have away, but I did it. We were starting to get really pissed now. Lance was really mad. I think he bumped some guy who got a little too close to him. It wasn't a gentle bump either. Sarge kept dumping on us. I think he had the biggest Napoleon complex of all time. He was determined to run us into the ground and prove that he was better. Finally, when we were completely exhausted, but somehow still alive, he came up to us. Forget it, he told us. You guys are out of here. You're done. You'll never be professional wrestlers. You guys don't have the fucking heart, so get out of my class. So we left. In my opinion, Lance had a lot more potential than I ever did, except for his nose. But Sarge and the experience at the power plant stifled Lance's wrestling ambitions for a long time. He still has a dream, believe it or not, of being a pro wrestler, but he hasn't made it yet. Hey Sarge, if you're reading this, I think about you every day. You fucking piece of shit. Yeah, you're a fucking piece of shit. So Dwayne Bruce, the head trainer of WCW's Power Plant, has some words for Batista and various other people who complained about how the Power Plant was run. He says WCW wasn't out to train people like that. I know he badmouthed me, he being Batista, but I think that's the best thing that ever happened to him. Look at him now, going from a bouncer to a movie star. There's no denying that. He was a bouncer making $100 a night. So I think he benefited from what we did to him, especially with his size and stuff. Now, of other people who said that, the power plant was a little too hard, he says, quote, I used to tell trainees exactly what we're going to do to them over the phone. So, I figured if they came in out of shape, that was their fault because I done told them what we were going to do. If they decide not to prepare for it, then shame on them. A lot of times, the ones who survived were the ones who made it to the second day. I'd have military guys, football guys, guys who had been training their whole life who said they would never go through another day at the power plant. So I was proud of that. But did I put people through hell? Yeah, I guess so. But it just proves that you got to love it and you got to dedicate your life to it. So that's exactly what I did. So he doesn't say it didn't happen. So but wrestling training is notoriously hard. So WCW's Power Plant had many very famous trainers, not just Dwayne Bruce. Paul Orndorff was also one of the trainers. Medusa Michelli, who we know as Alundra Blaze, was also a trainer. Mike Graham, Pez Whatley, Terry Taylor, Bobby Eaton were also trainers. But some of the students were pretty famous as far as guys who came through WCW that ended up going through the Power Plant who were trained by Jody Hamilton. So you had DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, you had Kevin Nash, you had Goldberg, you had Paul White, The Big Show, you had Shane Helms, Elliot Skipper, Mark Merrow, Steve Mongo McMichael, you had Molly Holly. So you had many who went through the days of the Power Plant while it was in operation from 91 to 2001. So the Power Plant, of course, closed when WCW went out of business. In 2005, 4 years after the Power Plant closed, Deep South Wrestling was reopened after Jody Hamilton had a meeting with Vince McMahon. Jody Hamilton, in his own words, said that Vince McMahon wanted him to teach wrestlers psychology, the hard part of wrestling. And so Deep South Wrestling was born in 2005. Then he complained that Vince McMahon didn't send him anything but steroid freaks who didn't know how to work and had no cardio. So it went from teaching these guys psychology to now teaching them conditioning and focusing on conditioning. He said that the bodybuilders that Vince would send him had massive egos and very bad attitudes, which led to a lot of contentions and a lot of complaining about what was going on in Deep South Wrestling. And that the bodybuilders complained about the training routines. He also said that he bumped heads a lot with John Laurinaitis, who frequently would call him on the phone and say, quote, Vince is livid. On one occasion, John Laurinaitis recorded Jody Hamilton going off on Vince for not caring about whether Vince was upset or not. Hamilton believes that this recording is what led to Deep South Wrestling being shut down. And then in 2007, Nick Patrick, who is the son of Jody Hamilton, believe it or not, backs this up by saying that there were many people in WWF, in the WWE offices, most notably Bruce Pritchard and John Laurinaitis, who did not like Deep South Wrestling and wanted it to go away. That another bone of contention was the firing of Bill Demott, who was, the focal point of a lot of complaints of students in Deep South Wrestling. So Mike Bucci, who worked in ECW as Nova and in WWF as Simon Dean, was also one of the members of the developmental team. Him, Laurinaitis, Tommy Dreamer, they all kind of worked on these programs together. And he was involved with the closing of Deep South Wrestling. And he says, essentially, John Laurinaitis wanted to shut down anything that Jim Ross had started. So if Jim Ross started it, Laurinaitis wanted to get rid of it, and he was just looking for a reason. And basically, Jody Hamilton and Bill Demott gave him a reason to shut down Deep South Wrestling, and all of its talents and different things were sent to Florida, where Florida Championship Wrestling was going to begin from 2007 to 2008. So, of course, the biggest controversy that came out of this thing was the whole Bill Demott situation. But there was also a huge lawsuit where Jody Hamilton filed a lawsuit against WWE in 2009. So we're going to have to talk about those things. So, pro wrestler Kevin Matthews, who was under WWE developmental deal during the time of Deep South Wrestling, he was the guy who brought up the Jelly Donut Stinkface incident that really got him fired from Florida Championship Wrestling. But this is a MySpace piece that he wrote during his, right before Deep South Wrestling was going to be closed. And he's going to detail some of the issues with Bill Demott in here. Then we're going to get into Bill Demott defending himself. So Kevin Matthews says, as I get online to check my mail yesterday, I was flooded with instant messages from anybody and everybody, all informing me of the same thing. DSW is done. Now, myself, being a very outspoken individual on my opinions of Deep South, and especially Bill Demott, I feel the need to finally shed some light on my, quote, time served in hell. I mean, Deep South Wrestling. Over the past year, I have noticed rumors and reports online about the ongoing occurrences that would happen behind closed doors of DSW. They would state how Demott would run us into the ground, make us do, quote, boot camp workout, and ultimately, when the day was complete, we learned a whole bunch of nothing about professional wrestling. Now, the one thing I have to say about all these reports was each and every one that I saw were almost 100% accurate. In my opinion, and many others, Billy was not in no position to be a head trainer of anything unless it was training for upcoming all-you-can-eat contests. Now, I'm not using this to trash DSW by any means because DSW belonged to Jody Hamilton, who was and is a great man. He treated me extremely well and looked after me during my tenure there. When I speak about my time in DSW, I'm speaking solely about Mr. Neck Fat himself, Bill Demott. What I found funny about training is we would spend so much time getting annihilated by his useless workouts that when it came to ring time, all he could do was drill you till your knees started buckling beneath you. Again, I don't blame Bill because he had to figure a way to kill 4 to 6 hours every day, and God knows he doesn't have a clue about how to work. So how could he teach that? Don't believe me? Watch any of his matches. On a daily basis, there were 2 classes. There was Dave Taylor's 9 to 12 a.m. class, the good or fun class, and then there was Demott's class from 12 to whenever you couldn't move anymore, usually 5 o'clock. I can honestly say that I spent more time injured than I did training, and the funny part is, never once did I get injured in Dave's class. Come to think of it, when you look at all the injuries that occurred in DSW, hernia surgeries, several knee surgeries, my bicep surgery, among countless others, all occurring during Bill's kill drill class. In my opinion, even though it was months after his release, the ultimate fall of Deep South was on Demott, as he made that place a living hell for everyone who wasn't a part of his clique. Unless you bowed to him and kissed his ass, chances are you were going to be buried. From anyone who went to both developmentals, they said the comparison was like heaven and hell. Some people told me he was just bitter because he was no longer a talent on the road, while I would myself believe it made him feel like a bigger person to bully others. There have been countless incidences where I thought for sure he would be replaced, but it never happened. How a trainer could get away with trying to break a talent's ankle and nothing happens to him is beyond me. How come no letters from OVW were sent to the office, yet it almost seemed like letters exposing Bill were mailed weekly from Deep South? Again, and nothing happened. So in my opinion, this was a long time coming, and Bill is to blame for the demise of Deep South Wrestling. Instead of making talent, he got his rock star, quote, mentally breaking talent and making them feel like pieces of shit. Now, myself, I'm a thick-headed son of a bitch. I can honestly say that, but I will also admit I was broken down in a big way. I went into Deep South with confidence and left a shell of a person I came in as. And the truth is, there weren't reasons that I felt the need to stay. I would have asked for my release or transferred 2 weeks in. Billy and myself butted heads almost immediately, and I was consistently referred to as talker backer. When Demott doesn't like you for whatever reason, never having to do with how talented or not you are, he goes after you and either A, tries to mentally break you to the point where you quit, or B, buries you to the office until you get fired. I remember one time he got in the ring with me and told me to give him a fireman's carry takeover, to which he then just plopped down on top of me, which I took as a shoot, which I was pretty much waiting for because at this point, I couldn't stand this fucking guy. 2 times he did it, and both times I threw him off me. And I have to admit, coming into DSW, I was highly intimidated by his reputation, but it turned out to be all hot smoke. From that point on, he lost any credibility as a tough guy that he had with me, believing he was coming in. Wasn't afraid of him then, most definitely not afraid of him now. I think he's a rather disturbed, delusional, bipolar man who needs to seek professional help ASAP. Now he has his clique of guys who basically did what drills they felt like doing and got cut a lot of slack. You had people with no training come in who buddied up to Bill and then walked and talked like they owned the place. It was just insane. Then you had his sorry cronies, the ones who just look at and nod your head at how pathetic they are. The two that stand out are Eric Perez and Jay Bradley. First off, Perez is by far one of the saddest, sorriest sons of bitches I ever met in my life. And apparently, asking people overseas aren't too fond of Eric Alexander themselves. And Mr. Bradley, Jay, or Bradley, better known to you Midwest fans, as he was a very big mouth, both used for ass kissing and running. Time to get exposed, Bradley. When I got injured and tore my bicep, he made a point to say, if they release you, make sure you throw Bill under the bus. I know you're reading this, Billiam. Kind of sucks finding out, quote, your boy said this behind your back, huh? But once I was released, good old Brad, with those lovely ass-kissing lips, also made it a point to bury me and try to get over. Touche. Brad, hell of a job. Now, how people like this can look in the mirror and actually be proud of themselves and feel like they're fucking real men is beyond me. Newsflash, you're a fucking puppet. But at a solid $500 a week, I mean, it's worth it. Who can turn down an opportunity like that? There are people who I would like to see make it from DSW and hope it's not over for them. Derek Nykirk and Mike Knox helped me out when I needed advice or when Bill was trying to mentally fuck me about one thing or another. Not sure what Knox's deal with ECW is, but I hope Nykirk's get a good run on TV. I think he's awesome to watch in the ring. It sucked to see Mike and Tracy go. They made killer gear. To me, Mike was probably the best talent in both of developmentals, and they lost out big by not using him. All right, so this was posted in April of 2007. Later, and several years later, Kevin Matthews would put out the infamous picture of the jelly donut Stinkface, which got Bill Demott into some trouble. Before we really get into the Stinkface jelly donut incident, I want to give Bill Demott an opportunity to defend himself from the accusations that he worked talent too hard. After that, we will get into the jelly donut Stinkface incident. So this is what Bill Demott had to say in his book, The Last Laugh. When we all trained together at Gold's Gym, nobody complained about anything. We worked those kids for 2 to 3 hours a day, and nobody grumbled or whined. However, on our first day in the new building, those problems began in spades. When we were working at Gold's Gym, everyone was blowing up. But there was a good thing because nobody was really in great cardio shape. When the time came for everyone to show what they could do in the ring, the kids were quickly separated to 2 groups, those who could and those who couldn't. As soon as the dead weight began to realize they weren't as good as they thought, and they couldn't hang with some of the others, they began making phone calls and sending emails to WWE to complain about their, quote, mistreatment. In many cases, they blamed me for asking them to do things they shouldn't have to do. The intensity of the workouts dictated how the problem children were handled. When we had a particular grueling workout, I knew I would be getting a phone call from the office asking me to explain while I was doing something or another. It became absolutely ridiculous to have a really good day of training, only to get a phone call at the end of the day with someone telling me so-and-so was complaining about being thrown out of the ring. Other complaints ran the gamut, and he's going to list some of the complaints. We're expected to do too much in one day. He says, quote, we train for 4 days a week, maybe 3 hours a day. The conditioning is too much for us to handle. We have to begin training too early in the morning. He says that we started at 8 o'clock. Bill plays favorites and doesn't push them as hard as he does the rest of us. Bill brought in some of his friends to intentionally hurt people he doesn't like. Bill talks nice to some people and treats others like dirt. Bill took so-and-so out for a drink but didn't invite me. Bill invited a group out to his house for dinner but didn't invite me. Bill gets in the ring and stretches people he doesn't like. The list of complaints were endless. At one time, we had too many kids in the building at the same time, so we had to split them into training 2 sessions. That was about the time Dave Taylor was brought on board as the second trainer, so everyone could get more training and ring time. One group was, quote, rewarded and called the A team, while the others, the B team, had to train with me as, quote, punishment. It was simply a rib. One of the guys in my group came up with the idea for a t-shirt, and we asked everyone from both sessions if they wanted to participate and order a t-shirt. The response from both groups was unanimous. Yes. Printed on the front of the t-shirts were, I'm happy to be B, and on the back, I wish I was here. It was a play on words about the A and B bullshit. Even that warranted a call to talent relations. Someone called to say that they hadn't been asked to participate and they didn't get a shirt. I got a call from Dreamer that night and was told we were no longer allowed to wear shirts because it offended some of the trainees. I was told if they did, they would be fined. When I hung up the phone, I said to myself, fuck that, and I continued to wear it. The students continued to wear them every chance they got to the gym, to everyday workouts, to Saturday workouts, and out around the town. They were proud to be known as the B team. So let's talk about the Jelly Donut Stinkface incident from the perspective of Bill Demott and some of the other people who were there. So Bill Demott was fired from WWE on 2 different occasions. He was fired in 2007 for various allegations of abuse. He was also fired again in 2015 for the very same reason. So we're not going to compile both of them. I'm going to leave each one to each developmental program. But he was fired partially in 2015 for something that had taken place 5 or 6 years prior. Okay, so this is going to be Bill Demott's response to the picture that came out from Deep South Wrestling that shows Luke Gallows giving Zack Ryder a stink face, what they call a donut stink face. And somebody took a picture of it, but the picture didn't come out for several years. But this is what Bill Demott had to say. They made a deal. They didn't want to train. They made a deal. What's the deal? I give somebody a squisher bare-assed with a jelly donut in their mouth. I look at about 40 people and I went, deal. Guy gets naked. Other guy sits in the corner with a jelly donut in his mouth. He runs across the ring, hits the Rikishi ass bump, squishing it all over his face. Funniest thing I ever seen in my life. Everybody goes, okay, we're done. Everybody can go home. No training, no nothing. That's the deal. 6 years later, that picture comes out on the internet. Bill Demott makes students train naked. Now, was it the smartest deal I ever made? No, but it was funny as hell. You're in a room with a bunch of people, all on the same page. They're tired for the week. Give me a deal and we're out. They made a deal. We struck the deal. 6 years later, somebody who was let go from the company and wasn't satisfied told a different story. Demott makes people train naked. I'm an internet sensation overnight. There was no malice. There was no nothing. It was a story innocent with a bunch of men and women who trained together every day that when things weren't going their way, turned around and handed it to someone else. One of the students that was at Deep South Wrestling is famously Devin Nicholson, who is on the internet as Hannibal of the Hannibal TV. So he gave his side of the story of what took place with the Jelly Donut Stinkface. So here's what he says per F4W Online. I was in Deep South during the time of the incident between Zack Ryder and Melissa Coates and Drew Hackinson. Nobody involved in the naked jelly donut incident were forced to do it. They volunteered to do it to get out of training that day. Bill had come up with the elaborate game because he wanted them to train and didn't think they'd agree to it. Hackinson was not nearly naked. He was totally naked. The only thing covering his genital area were his hands. He was in the ring nude for approximately 30 to 45 minutes, while Demott walked from one corner to the other, holding up approximately 18 jelly donuts for Hackinson to stink face on both Zack Ryder and Melissa Coates. Ryder and Coates were cheered on heavily by many of the DSW talent, who also did not want to train. I had passed a tryout and was paying to be there to learn wrestling and attempt to get a WWE contract, but was sent back to wrestling in Puerto Rico shortly after this incident occurred. I doubt Vince McMahon knew what this type of training was going on in his territory, and I had assumed him finding out was one of the reasons it was shut down, and Demott was let go. Although I disagreed with some of his training methods, I had a good relationship with Demott while I was in DSW, and I valued the wrestling advice he gave me. Tommy Dreamer, who ran the developmental program for WWE, he helped run it rather with the head of talent relations, who I believe at this time was Johnny Ace, and or maybe it was Jim Ross, along with Mike Bucci and a couple of other guys who were ran the developmental programs. And this is what he had to say about the Bill Demott accusations. I ran the developmental center. I ran OVW. I ran Deep South. I like to say that wrestling training is different. When I was trained by Johnny Rides, I was stretched to the point of crying. I remember sometimes driving back on the BQE and my hands were literally shaking because I was stretched. I was pushed to the peak physically. With that being said, that is training. I think there could be some merit, but it doesn't help that these accusations are coming from ex-talent because it looks like sour grapes. It would have come from someone and no one would speak up. And that's essentially his position. But he says, he continues, I had one problem with the WWE Developmental Center. I went down there and kicked everyone out. I said, guys, gals, I hired each and every one of you. I need to know if something is wrong so I can fix it for you. If you don't want to tell me, you can tell me privately. I handed every single one of them, all 60 of them, clipboards with my hotel, and you can meet me privately. Not one person stepped up. If there was a problem I had with Bill Demott or any of my trainers, I would go to my boss, who would then go to Vince McMahon. When I did have a problem with Bill, I said, let's put a video camera in there. They said, okay, no problem. I never had a problem with Bill personally or professionally, and I do think he is a good trainer. Not all coaches like their players. I've seen on Twitter people stick up for Bill, and I've seen people not stick up for Bill. Everybody's situation is different. If there were homophobic slurs, then yes, that has to be addressed. I know that when he worked for me, everything that I asked, he did. I had a problem with where someone brought up racism. I said, hey, let me clear it. Then no one said anything. I was willing to help you. There were no ramifications whatsoever. Let me cure this problem, then there would be no problems. So, Tommy Dreamer, who was running the facility, did not have a problem with Bill Demott and says that nobody complained. So let's talk about the lawsuit that Jody Hamilton filed against the WWE in 2019. The following excerpts that I will be reading will be all from PW Insider, who did a really good job of documenting the updates and everything about that. So let's get into that. In October of 2009, the WWE went to court with Jody Hamilton. You know, they filed some motions, and here's what came out of the motions. I think this best sort of sets up what Deep South Wrestling claimed and what WWE responded with. So, claim one, Hamilton claimed breach of contract. Hamilton's version of events was that he and DSW were, quote, fully compliant with their contractual agreement with the WWE. That partnership saw Hamilton personally paid a salary of $80,000, and Deep South Wrestling, the company, paid $80,000 to provide developmental talents with training. They were also to provide a TV outlet, which the lawsuit claims was provided and aired in the Southeast United States and Canada briefly on the Fight Network, for those talents as part of the talent exchange program. Hamilton claimed that the contractual agreement between the two sides allowed for their deal to be severed, but only with 90 days written notice between the sides. Hamilton claimed that the WWE ignored that clause and instead, quote, arranged through an intentional and calculated method, unquote, to show up and shut down the territory at DSW's place of business without providing notice to Hamilton or DSW. In response, WWE claimed Hamilton and DSW failed to state a claim upon which relief may be granted, and that the lawsuit failed to address any wrongdoing on WWE's part in regard to their end of the DSW relationship. WWE's attorneys claimed that the entire situation was, quote, a misguided attempt to use litigation to lash out against WWE over disappointment with their WWE's decision to terminate the parties' business agreement, unquote. WWE also claimed that contractually they had every right to sever the agreement. On October the 2nd, Judge Johnson sided with Hamilton, stating that under Georgia law, Hamilton's complaint adequately alleged breach of contract based on WWE's alleged ignoring of the 90-day clause when severing their agreement with DSW. Johnson said that WWE's response that Hamilton had, quote, failed to address, unquote, wrongdoing was without merit. Claim number 2, that WWE did not interfere with DSW's contract and relationship with DSW wrestlers. When WWE officials John Laurinaitis and Mike Bucci came to DSW headquarters on April the 17th, 2007, Hamilton alleged that WWE, quote, made every effort, unquote, to prevent him from knowing they were coming on the premises. Hamilton claimed in the lawsuit that WWE's plans were to remove all personal and computer information without anyone from DSW being present. Hamilton's lawsuit also alleged that WWE shut down the territory. They, quote, removed wrestling rings, seating, computer hardware, software, and information belonging to DSW, unquote. The suit noted that, quote, shared personnel, unquote, were informed they were being transferred to OVW and later FCW, and that they were to, quote, have no further dealing, unquote, with Hamilton and DSW. That order, according to Hamilton, was disastrous for his company. Hamilton has set up a series of live DSW events to be performed at the Six Flags Park in Georgia, as well as additional events to benefit the American Cancer Society and the Mothers Against Drunk Driving later that summer. In the case of the Six Flag events, Hamilton had arranged for WWE to send main roster talent to each of those shows. When WWE killed their DSW agreement, those charity events ended up canceled, causing DSW liability damages in the amount of $320,000, and Hamilton personal damages to the tune of $56,000. Hamilton has claimed that WWE used, quote, mob-like tactics, unquote, to prevent talent from working for his charity in the wake of shutting down the territory, noting not one wanted to cross WWE as they controlled the wrestling business. Hamilton's suit alleged that John Laurinaitis gathered all of the, quote, independent wrestlers, unquote, scheduled to perform on said events and said, quote, issued an ominous warning. He cautioned them that if they ever stepped foot in DSW again or had anything to do with Hamilton or DSW, their relationship with WWE would end and they would, quote, never work in the wrestling industry, unquote. Hamilton claimed that, quote, not one wrestler, unquote, was willing to step foot onto one of his scheduled shows for fear of crossing WWE. In his lawsuit, Hamilton noted that WWE classifies their contracted talent as, quote, independent contractors, unquote, and shouldn't be able to instruct them where to work and to treat them as employees by ordering them not to work for DSW. As previously noted here, obviously a huge percentage of DSW's roster were made up by WWE developmental talents signed to WWE, not Deep South Wrestling. WWE's response to their alleged interference with DSW wrestlers was that they couldn't have done so based on this virtue that there were no contracts between DSW and the wrestler in the first place, since WWE has assigned their own contracted talents to the territory in the first place. WWE also stated Hamilton and DSW had failed to present any arguments that WWE induced others not to work for or with DSW, especially since the talents were under contract to WWE to begin with. On October the 2nd, Johnson wrote that established tortious interference with contractual obligations, Hamilton would have to provide, quote, a valid contract that the WWE acted purposefully to prevent that contract from being executed in order to financially hurt DSW. Since DSW failed to show that any wrestlers were under contract to them, that claim was dismissed by Johnson, who noted, quote, even assuming plaintiff's allegations to be true, they have not shown they are entitled to relief. Johnson also ruled that DSW failed to state a claim for tortious interference with their business relations, so claims in that regard to the canceled shows were tossed out. Claim number 4, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Hamilton's lawsuit claimed that the former wrestler suffered from emotional distress due to the loss of his developmental deal for DSW, the wrestler being Hamilton himself. The lawsuit claimed WWE's, quote, intentional actions were intended to cause Hamilton severe emotional distress, unquote. WWE tried to throw the emotional distress claims out the window when they replied in July, noting that Hamilton did not file the emotional distress claim within 2 years as legally required. Hamilton's April 2009 filing came 2 days after the cutoff date for the claim. WWE also stated that in addition to the late filing, that claim, quote, must be dismissed as a matter of law because accepting all factual allegations are true for the purpose of this motion to dismiss. WWE's alleged actions do not rise to the level of extreme and outrageous conduct necessary for such an allegation to stand. Judge Johnson agreed with WWE that Hamilton did not file within the time limit and dismissed that claim, but noted that even if Hamilton had been within his window to file, Johnson still would have dismissed the claim. Johnson wrote, quote, WWE's alleged actions do not rise to the requisite level of extreme and outrageous conduct as required by Georgia law. So while WWE knocked a number of Hamilton's claims out, the case will move forward and it looks to hinge upon WWE's ignored their own contractual agreement of providing Hamilton and DSW with 90 days notice. They were shutting down Atlanta developmental territory in favor of OVW and Florida Championship Wrestling. In 2010, they were settled out of court on the case of the breach of contract of not giving Deep South Wrestling 90 days notice. When it comes to the legacy of Deep South Wrestling as a WWE developmental program, I think Mike Bucci best codifies it when he talked about how happy talent were when DSW was finally shut down. After months of allegations and all sorts of complaints going to the office in Stanford, it was just time for DSW to go away, and talent did not like it. It is also not as well discussed throughout history as OVW or FCW or even Heartland. So it is sort of the bastard of the WWE developmental system. But still, the trainers, Jody Hamilton, Bill Demott, Dr. Tom Pritchard, and I believe also Dave Taylor, they produced some pretty good talent. You know, Kofi Kingston went through there. The Miz went through there. Luke Gallows went through there. Zack Ryder, Tyrus, Hannibal, even Kenny Omega went through Deep South Wrestling. On the subject of Kenny Omega, just kind of as an aside, some people say Kenny Omega was there for about 2 months. Some people say he was there for about a year. But in any event, Kenny Omega left. As he said, he thought that it didn't fit him. He didn't fit in. And he felt like he could better prove himself by going to Japan. And ended up being a better move for him. So Deep South Wrestling was plagued with all sorts of drama and allegations of abuse. And thankfully, it was closed and we don't have to deal with it anymore. So like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, donate to the channel, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah. Rap Circle is finally here.